President Trump is calling on the Iranian people to rise up and take back their country from the Ayatollah. His message comes on the heels of one of the most significant protest movements Iran has seen in decades. Millions of Iranians flooding the streets, demanding justice, demanding freedom. But those protests were silenced, not through negotiation, not through reform, but through bloodshed. The Iranian regime reportedly killed more than 30,000 of its own citizens to crush the uprising and hold on to power. So, how did it all begin? How did a government bring down a movement that massive? Today, we are revisiting our full coverage from that time, putting it all together so you can see the complete picture.
Iran is in total collapse.
These are some of the largest protests in Iran since 2022.
As we speak, thousands of Iranians have taken to the streets, marching and protesting against the government. Years of neglect, they simply cannot take it anymore. The people have decided that if the government cannot fix the problems, then maybe they no longer need a government at all. This is a fight for survival, dignity, and freedom. And from what has been happening these past few days, it seems that Iranians are ready to die for their beliefs rather than be oppressed any longer. In the next few minutes, you'll see why what is happening in Iran is far bigger, far more alarming, and far more connected to forces outside its borders than anyone expected. One glance at Iran's streets tells the story. Beneath the surface, something is boiling, and with each passing day, the flame of rebellion grows stronger. The frustration driving people into the open did not suddenly erupt in December. It has been building for months, first in silence, then breaking loose in a surge that can no longer be contained. It really began back in May of 2025. Truck drivers were among the first to stop working, fed up with shrinking pay and rising costs. Bakers soon followed after, struggling to afford flour and basic supplies. Factory workers walked out next. At the time, these actions felt small and scattered, easy for authorities to brush aside, but the pressure did not ease. Retirees joined in, angry that pensions no longer covered daily life. Students showed up next, and teachers stood beside them. Small groups gathered in public spaces, holding signs, chanting softly, testing how far they could go. With each week, those limits stretched further. By the time autumn arrived, the spark had spread. What began as local protests over wages and shortages had grown into something larger and harder to contain. Crowds started filling the streets in city after city. Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz, Mashhad, Hamadan, Kermanshah, Karaj, Malard, Keshemaylan, Zanjan, Paradis, Kerman. These were no longer isolated flare-ups. This was a national mood shifting in real time. People were no longer asking to be heard. They were refusing to step back. Then now, as we welcome 2026, something has changed. The unrest has gained a new kind of weight as Tehran's Grand Bazaar has closed its doors. For Iranians, this is a pivotal moment, as the bazaar is not just a place to shop, it is the country's economic pulse. When its doors shut, it sends a message everyone understands. Now, shopkeepers stand shoulder to shoulder, chanting as their voices echo through narrow corridors once filled with buyers and bargaining. A place built for trade became a stage for defiance. To understand why this matters so much, you have to understand the bazaar itself. For generations, it has reflected the nation's mood. When things are stable, it hums with life. When trouble is coming, it goes quiet. Now, rows of metal shutters are pulled down. Phone sellers are gone. Iron dealers are gone. Appliance stalls sit in darkness. That silence speaks louder than any protest chant outside. What makes this moment especially striking is who these merchants are. The bazaar has long been one of the most conservative pillars of Iranian society. In past crises, it often stood with the regime, even when others turned away. Closing shop is not just about lost income. It is a rare withdrawal of support. History shows that when the bazaar strikes, political grounds begin to shift, and this time is no different. Economic pain has eaten away at even the deepest loyalties, and the quiet halls of the bazaar now ring like a warning bell for the entire country. Protests stopped being about only prices and shortages a while ago. Now they've become open challenges to the leadership itself. Even things as religious as chants targeting the supreme leader fill the streets now, showing how the mood has hardened and how frustration has turned into defiance. The chants have left no room for doubt. Crowds are roaring death to the dictator in Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz, and beyond. Words that were once carried in whispers now shouted openly in the streets. What begins as anger over bread and wages is transforming into a direct assault on the very core of authority. The slogans cut through the air like a verdict, echoing off shuttered shops and government buildings. Each cry is more than a protest. It is a declaration that patience has run out. The people are no longer pleading for relief. They are demanding an end to the rule itself.
One of the problems with making videos like these, where we show a lot of drone strikes, even if no human or Russian soldiers are getting hurt in the video, YouTube usually demonetizes or restricts our videos. In fact, in the last week, we had 4 of our videos get demonetized. According to YouTube, showing drone strikes or even footage from the front lines is not advertiser friendly, and that's why the videos are restricted. But this is the reality of modern warfare, and this is the war Ukrainians are fighting and trying to survive. So we believe it's important to cover this all, and that's why we launched our own platform, Basics Insider. We built it from scratch, so we don't have any restrictions. We don't have to blur our drone strike, we don't have to blur frontline footage, and we don't have to blur Russian air bases getting destroyed. On top of this, we actually don't run any ads on the site. That way, we don't have to censor ourselves just because advertisers are not happy about what we are covering. We don't fund the site through ads. We fund it through your support. So if you're someone who's interested in coverage like this and you want to watch our videos uncensored and get bonus content that we just cannot upload here on YouTube, then definitely go join us at basicsinsider.com. You can also click the link in the description or scan the QR code on your screen. By joining, you can watch all the content that we have already uploaded and all the videos we will upload in the future. On top of that, you'll be supporting our coverage and supporting our channel.
On the ground, the streets feel fragile, as if they could tip at any moment. Smoke rises from burning barricades, carrying the sharp smell of fuel and melting plastic. Sirens scream, then disappear beneath the roar of thousands of voices. Police form lines at intersections, shields locked, batons raised. The scene paints a picture of confrontation and finality. For many in the crowd, it feels less like a protest and more like a breaking point. A single message hangs in the air. Enough is enough. Reports speak of clashes and violent confrontations, but the full cost is hidden behind strict censorship. Even so, blood stains the pavement, mixing with rain and dust, offering fleeting glimpses of what cameras never fully capture. And yet, despite the brutality, the protests keep growing. Every clash seems to do the opposite of what the authorities intend. It hardens resolve. Every attempt to crush the movement only fuels it. Instead of fading, the fire spreads wider, brighter, and harder to contain with each passing day. This intensity is not limited to the capital. Kurdish neighborhoods, long ignored by the central government, now echo with chants and drums. Oil workers in Aseluye have abandoned rigs. Retirees join rallies in city centers. Parents hold their children's hands while chanting slogans against shortages and corruption. Grandparents raise voices that have been silent for years. The protests carry the weight of families who cannot bathe freely, cook their meals without rationing, or watch their children grow up with dignity. The streets are no longer just lines on a map. They are a living mirror of daily survival. All of this makes it clear. The protests are not random outbursts. They are the result of years of frustration, hardship, and neglect. To understand why people have reached this breaking point, you have to look at the forces that pushed them into the streets and left them with no choice but to act. For years, people across Iran have been holding on, telling themselves things might get better if they just wait a little longer. Prices climbed month after month, while wages quietly lost their value. Basic goods became harder to find, and when they did appear, they cost more than most families could afford. Parents skipped meals or cut corners so their children could eat. Students stayed up late, studying and dreaming of futures that always seemed just out of reach. Workers showed up every day to jobs that barely covered the bills, convincing themselves that stability would eventually return. Through it all, frustration was carried, quietly. People learned how to survive instead of live. They hoped the government would step in, or that someone, somewhere, would fix what was breaking. The hope was thin and fragile, built on promises that were repeated often but never delivered. Still, many clung to it because letting go felt even more frightening. Then the rial collapsed, and whatever people had been holding on to finally slipped away. In December, the currency plunged to around 1.54 million against the US dollar, the lowest point in Iran's history. Almost overnight, prices for food, medicine, and everyday essentials shot up. What had already been difficult became impossible. Inflation, already above 40%, pushed simple items out of reach in a matter of weeks. Families who would have been barely managing were suddenly forced to confront the truth that they could no longer avoid. You could see that moment clearly in Tehran's Grand Bazaar. Shopkeepers slammed their doors shut. Counters were hit in anger. Shouts echoed through narrow alleyways that had been quiet for years. These were not people known for protest. They were merchants who had endured crisis after crisis in silence. Their reaction said everything. The fall of the rial was not just an economic shock. It was the moment many realized that no help was coming. As the currency spiraled downward, it became a symbol of everything slipping away at once. Savings vanished. Security disappeared. Dignity eroded. The small hope people had carried for years finally broke. What replaced it was not confusion, but clarity. The collapse exposed a reality everyone had felt for a long time, but could no longer tolerate. Life in Iran had become unbearable. Waiting had achieved nothing. Trust had been exhausted. When people poured into the streets, they were not only protesting prices or currency rates, they were fighting for survival. For years, frustration had been swallowed and pushed aside. Now it demanded to be heard. But this is not the full picture. It is tempting to blame everything on the collapse of the rial, but that only explains the moment things snapped, not why they were already breaking. The currency crash was the trigger, not the cause. What pushed Iran to this point was years of slow damage piling up, year after year, without real repair. For more than a decade, the economy had been weakening in plain sight. Poor management hollowed out institutions meant to protect people. Corruption siphoned money away from public services and into private networks. Sanctions restricted trade and cut off access to foreign currency. Businesses struggled to import materials. Families struggled to plan even a month ahead. Instead of tackling these problems head-on, leaders leaned on short-term fixes, printing money, borrowing more, pushing pain into the future. Each year, the cracks grew a little wider until the system could no longer hold its weight. That breakdown shows clearly in the government's finances. For several years now, Iran has been running massive budget deficits, climbing toward nearly 30% of GDP by 2024 and 2025. This did not happen overnight. It built up slowly, as spending kept rising while revenue fell, especially under sanctions. To cover the gap, the state turned to borrowing and money creation. That choice had consequences. For ordinary Iranians, this meant life quietly shrinking. Paychecks brought fewer items each month. Rent swallowed larger shares of income. Food became something to measure carefully. Saving felt pointless because inflation erased it anyway. Even before the rial collapsed, families were already falling behind. Many held on, hoping things would stabilize. Instead, the ground kept slipping. Sanctions made everything worse. Fresh snapback measures from the UN and Europe tightened pressure just as people were running out of room to cope. These came on top of Trump's renewed maximum pressure campaign after the June strikes. As a result, foreign trade slowed to a crawl. Cash reserves consequently dried up and imports stalled. As usual, the pain of this was reflected on the citizens as the cost of living surged. Bread that once cost 20,000 rials jumped to 35,000. Fuel prices rose by more than 30%. Medicine became scarce, or so expensive that families simply went without. Poor management at home lit the fuse, but those external blows turned a slow burn into a wildfire. Ordinary families were left paying for decisions made far beyond their control. As economic pressure mounted, it collided with another crisis that people could no longer ignore: the collapse of the environment, especially water. Tehran is now approaching what experts call zero day, the point where taps could run dry within weeks. For a city of nearly 15 million people, that fear changes everything. And this is not speculation. Iran has endured 6 straight years of drought that have left the nation parched. Reservoirs that once sustained the capital are at historic lows. The Amir al-Kabir Dam is down to about 8% capacity, and the Latyan Dam is below 10%. The reality has already reached people's homes. Some neighborhoods lose water for hours at a time. Families ration what they can store. Washing clothes, bathing, and even cooking become calculated decisions. For people already crushed by inflation, the thought of losing water turns stress into panic. Zero day is not a metaphor. It's a countdown. This disaster is not just about the weather. Years of mismanagement made it far worse. Dams were built without long-term planning. Aquifers were drained until they collapsed. Water was wasted on low-yield crops while cities dried out. Nearly 90% of Iran's water goes to agriculture, which delivers little return. Farmers abandon land worked on for generations. Cities queue for rationed supplies. Officials have even warned that Tehran may need to be evacuated if the rains do not come. The idea of moving a capital city shows how close the system is to breaking. As water disappears, air quality collapses too. Cheap fuel, outdated refineries, and drought have turned cities into choking traps. In the summer of 2025, the temperatures in Tehran pushed close to 50 degrees Celsius. I can't even imagine that heat. Naturally, offices and banks shut down. And you see, heat trapped pollution over the city. And with reservoirs nearly empty, there was nothing left to hold back strong dust and smog. As a result, health problems rose, crops failed, and food security weakened. This quite literally means that for the average Iranian, every breath has become heavier. Power outages add yet another layer of strain. Whole neighborhoods go dark without warning, leaving families sitting in the heat, waiting for the lights to flick back on. Fridges stop humming, food starts to spoil, and what little security people had managed to hold on to slips away with every blackout. At the same time, gasoline prices climb higher, cutting deeper into already shrinking incomes. Getting to work, running a generator, even keeping a small shop alive suddenly feels out of reach. The things that once kept daily life moving, like electricity, fuel, and refrigeration, are now turning into burdens. Outdated grids and dwindling water supplies make electricity feel like a luxury instead of something people can count on. For families already stretched thin, these failures push them past their limits. A blackout is not just an inconvenience anymore. It is a reminder that the system cannot even provide the basics of modern life. Each spoiled meal, each powerless night, each unaffordable tank of fuel drives home the same truth. Survival is getting harder by the day. Throughout all of this, one thing has stood out clearly: the idea of how little the state cares for them. While families are told to conserve water and endure toxic air, the state has continued pouring money into military and foreign ambitions. In 2025 alone, defense spending rose 35% to about $23 billion. Missiles were fully funded, and military projects were heavily expanded. None of these actions lowered food prices, filled reservoirs, or cleared the air. The contrast was impossible to miss. While billions flowed into weapons, nuclear facilities, and foreign alliances, at home, families wondered whether the tap would run or just cough out dust and air. Think about that for a second. The nuclear program was sold for decades as progress and pride. However, a few trillion later, for many Iranians, it has become a symbol of sacrifice without reward. By 2025, Iran had reached nuclear threshold status, enriching uranium to 60%. The scale was enormous, and yet daily life barely changed. Electricity did not get cheaper, jobs did not multiply, and food remained expensive. From the perspective of a regular citizen, the money always seemed to flow out and never in. That's why, for many, foreign partnerships have deepened the strain. For example, in 2025, Iran signed a 20-year strategic partnership with Russia covering defense, energy, and technology. The deal promised new investment and advanced systems. Little of that has appeared. Instead, they pulled Iran deeper into geopolitical conflicts and triggered harsher sanctions. All the while, Russia benefits from energy exports and defense cooperation. What the people see is their beloved land becoming the punching bag and absorbing the cost of conflicts it did not start. The sense of injustice has hardened into anger. Over time, these failures stacked up: economic pressure, environmental collapse, foreign priorities that ignored daily survival. The fall of the rial simply exposed what had already broken. That weight has now spilled into the streets. Youth unemployment remains crushing, nearly 20% in cities, and almost double for young women. College degrees lead to waiting, not opportunity. Dreams turn into plans to leave. Strikes spread across factories, schools, oil fields, and hospitals. Teachers walk out. Medical staff joins them. Minors, retirees, and students march side by side. Parents protest with their children. So, when you step back and look at all of it, this is no longer a single problem spinning out of control. It is a full collision. Economic failure, environmental collapse, and misplaced priorities have crashed into each other all at the same time. This is not about fixing one policy or adjusting one budget line. It is a national breaking point. People are no longer asking for reform or patience. They're asking for the basics of life: water, food, stability, dignity, and they are done waiting quietly while those things slip away. Then came the moment that changed everything. On December 18th, the president finally said out loud what people had already felt for years. Speaking to university students and academics, he admitted the crisis was beyond the government's control. His words were blunt and almost resigned. If someone can do something, by all means, go for it. I can't do anything. Don't curse me. This was not a promise. It was not a plan. It was an open confession that the system had reached its limits. For years, leaders had insisted the economy could be stabilized. They said sanctions could be managed. They promised shortages would ease. But now the truth was out in the open. The president himself confirmed what daily life had already proven. The government could not fix this. That admission hit hard. It changed the mood of the country almost overnight. The collapse was no longer framed as bad luck or temporary pain. It was exposed as a failure at the very top. When the president admitted that there was no solution in hand, anger shifted into something deeper. This was no longer about wages, inflation, or empty shelves. It became about survival and dignity. Families were already stretched to the edge. Now they were being told openly that no help was coming. Any illusion of control disappeared, and with it went the belief that change could come from inside the system. Then, just days later, that sense of abandonment grew sharper. On December 29th, 2025, Mohammad Reza Farazin, the governor of Iran's central bank, abruptly resigned. For years, he had overseen reckless monetary policies, rising deficits, and quiet inflation that wiped out savings and crushed the middle class. When the crisis finally exploded, he walked away. To many Iranians, this did not feel like accountability. It felt like an escape. Together, the president's confession and the central bank's governor's resignation sent a clear message. The people in charge were not fixing the damage. They were backing away from it. The collapse of the rial, the shuttered shops, the empty shelves, and the drying taps were not accidents. They were the result of deliberate choices made by leaders who now seemed ready to leave others to deal with the consequences. For families watching their savings vanish and their children go hungry, Farazin's exit was not a solution. It was proof that the system was unraveling. The people who steered the country into the storm were stepping aside, while everyone else was left standing in the wreckage. That double blow explains why these protests feel different. Leadership did not just fail, it admitted defeat, and then it began to retreat. That is why the demonstrations are bigger, louder, and more intense than anything seen in years. The protests are no longer driven by hope for reform. They are fueled by the realization that no one at the top is coming to help. And at this point, some people might say, well, protests have happened in Iran before. This is just another phase. But that misses what makes this moment different. In the past, protests often centered on political slogans or ideological demands. This time, the fight is more basic. It's about survival, about dignity, about the ability to live with water, food, and security. When families cannot bathe, cook, or afford bread, protests stop being political and it becomes about existence. You can hear that shift in the chants. What began as anger over prices now openly targets the supreme leader. It rejects money spent on foreign conflicts while people at home go without. Economic pain has turned into rejection of the entire system. That makes these protesters harder to silence. People are not marching for abstract ideas. They are marching for their lives. The scale is staggering. Right now, protests have spread across the country. That covers the major towns and dozens of smaller towns. With every new town or city, the momentum grows, building towards a full national rebellion. This is not one group speaking out. It was the country speaking as one. And beneath the anger runs another powerful force: inequality. Those with money and connections are already finding exits. As problems at home intensify, wealthy Iranians are moving funds abroad. They are buying property in Dubai, Istanbul, and London. These cities offer clean water, stable electricity, and safety. For the elites, escape is possible. For everyone else, it is not. That's where the wealth disparity starts to sink in. Unlike the ultra-wealthy, most people cannot leave. They cannot buy security or transfer their lives overseas. They stay behind, rationing bread, queuing for water, and facing batons in the streets. That contrast deepens the divide. It makes the injustice impossible to ignore. The system protects those who can afford to escape and abandons those who cannot. Survival, dignity, and fairness become the heart of the movement. Because of that, fear, once the regime's strongest tool, has lost its grip. When survival is on the line, arrests and violence no longer feels like the worst outcome. One street is cleared, another fills up the next day. Desperation has replaced fear. And desperation is louder than intimidation. The response from the state has been firm. Security forces have deployed tear gas and batons to break up gatherings, leading to clashes in Tehran, Hamadan, and other cities. Some opposition reports claim direct shooting at protesters in isolated areas, though details remain unconfirmed amid tight information controls. Arrests have followed in several spots, adding to the tension. Officials acknowledge the economic pain, but warn that unrest could be exploited by outside forces. That mix of force and deflection has only sharpened frustrations on the ground. At the same time, the government leans on the same old tricks: price caps, emergency imports, a few handouts, and reshuffling ministers. None of it touches the real crisis. A bag of rice cannot undo years of collapse, and new faces can't fix broken policies. People have seen this pattern too many times. It no longer buys trust. President Masoud Pezeshkian has even tried a different approach. On December 30th, he acknowledged what he called the protesters' legitimate demands. He urged restraint and ordered talks with representatives. It was a rare move, one that broke from hardline responses. But after years of broken promises, many on the streets heard only more words. What might have been a bridge now feels like hesitation. Truthfully, short-term fixes cannot extinguish a crisis this deep. The fire has been burning for years, and that is why the question is no longer whether the protests will continue. The real question is, what comes next? To be frank, the road ahead for Iran is uncertain, but the possible paths are already visible. Each one is risky, and each one could be triggered by events happening right now. Nothing exists in isolation. Every decision, every shortage, every protest interacts with the others. The crises feed off of each other. They build momentum and make each outcome more unpredictable. The first and most urgent danger is escalation. This is the path that could turn simmering anger into a storm that sweeps the country. Another sharp drop in the rial could erase whatever little savings families have left. A fresh round of water rationing could push Tehran closer to 0 day, the moment when the taps could run dry entirely. Another strike in the oil sector could ripple through the economy, leaving prices even higher and frustration even sharper. The South Paras oil strike showed just how fast unrest can spread from one sector to the entire nation. This combination of economic collapse, environmental stress, and labor disruptions could ignite a nationwide uprising. The anger that has been building for years is ready to overflow, and once it does, it could be almost impossible to control. The situation in western Iran adds a dangerous layer. Kurdish communities in provinces like Kermanshah have long carried deep grievances against the central government. Crowds there have already joined the protests, and frustration runs deeper than in many other areas. Security forces are already stretched thin, trying to manage demonstrations in Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz, and beyond. If unrest flares along the borders at the same time as the capital, it could pull resources away at a critical moment. Militants and opportunists who have waited for openings during the past unrest might see a chance now. If local anger links with outside forces, the crisis could move from street protests to something far more violent and difficult to contain. That kind of flare-up would not stay local. It could ripple across borders, destabilize fragile regions, and draw in neighbors who never wanted to be involved. Fragmentation is another possibility. Localized protests could continue without coordination, burning hot in one city and fading in another. Repression, arrests, and fatigue could slow the movement over time. Hundreds have already been killed, and thousands detained. Fatigue is a tool the state knows how to use. If fear returns or if communities feel isolated, momentum could break. The anger would remain, but without unity, it might never become a force capable of demanding real change. It would be like sparks flashing and then dying out, leaving only the faint smell of smoke and disappointment. Policy correction remains another path, though history shows it rarely happens without serious pressure from the streets. The government could attempt transparency, targeted subsidies, or infrastructure fixes to ease suffering. Cutting foreign and military spending could free billions for food, medicine, and water projects. Defense spending alone jumped 35% in 2025, reaching $23 billion. That money could have stabilized households and prevented some of the desperation now visible in every city. But leaders rarely act without coercion, and citizens know this. Without pressure, policy promises stay words on paper, empty gestures that fail to reach the people in need. External shocks present the most dangerous path. A regional conflict could amplify every weakness inside the country. Beyond Iran's borders, the unrest is drawing sharp attention. Washington and Tel Aviv sense an opening. President Trump has a meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu to hash out their competing visions for the Middle East. But on Iran, their interests converge. In public remarks, Trump went further, threatening new strikes and vowing to knock the hell out of them if Tehran pushed too far. For Israel, the protests and economic collapse weaken a longtime adversary. For the United States, they offer a chance to pressure Iran at a moment of vulnerability. Russia and China are moving in the opposite direction, tightening energy and arms ties with Tehran. Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE watch closely, worried about instability but also aware of the chance to chip away at Iran's regional influence. In this way, the domestic crisis is no longer just about bread lines and water shortages. It is becoming a stage where outside powers test their leverage, each calculating how far Iran can bend before it breaks. Climate extremes make all of this worse. Prolonged droughts could force the rationing of water in major cities. Frustration could turn into panic. Tehran's reservoirs are already dangerously low. One more dry season could push millions into an immediate survival crisis. Combine that with sanctions or conflict, and even minor shocks could escalate into full-blown disasters. The system is fragile, stretched thin, and under relentless pressure. In a country this unstable, even a small push from outside could trigger a far larger internal crisis. No matter which path unfolds, the signs are clear. Citizens are watching. The government is watching. History is watching. Every shortage, every protest, every policy choice builds on what came before. They shape what comes next, often in ways no one can really fully predict. Iran today is trapped in a storm of crises that collide and reinforce one another. The economy has been hollowed out by corruption and mismanagement. Drought and poisoned air strangle the environment. Military spending drains billions while families ration bread and water. Foreign entanglements deepen isolation instead of providing relief. Together, these failures confirm what people feel in their daily lives. The system is broken. It cannot reliably feed its citizens. It cannot provide clean water. It cannot shield families from inflation or violence. This is why the protests have grown beyond politics or ideology. They are now about survival, about dignity, about reclaiming control over lives that feel stripped of choice. Parents march alongside their children. Workers strike beside teachers. Retirees walk shoulder to shoulder with students. The human face of the movement is unmistakable. It is asking a single urgent question. How long can a government survive when it cannot meet the basic needs of its people?
It has finally happened. For the first time in decades, the Islamic Republic of Iran has lost control of its own territory. We now have reports that 2 major border cities have fallen to protesters, with security forces throwing down their weapons and actually joining the revolution. But as the regime loses ground, their response is turning terrifyingly violent. From shooting at hospitals to blackmailing grieving families, here's the dark reality of what is happening inside Iran.
To quell protests in early January, one of the most violent crackdowns was in the western province of Iran. Verified footage shows a demonstration taking place outside a hospital. People stand chanting. Then, security forces open fire, leaving behind a trail of smoke and fire as protesters flee. Experts say the evolution of these protests is significant.
We are now witnessing protests in pretty much every major city in Iran, which actually tells you that the economic situation in Iran is affecting even the base of support of the Islamic Republic. This started as an economic protest.
Now, because of stuff like this, the protests have been getting more and more intense, and they're spreading to more and more cities. As of January 6th, protests have been recorded in 111 cities and towns across the country. It is also important to point out that on December 28th, the protests started as an economic protest. People were unhappy about the Iranian currency that was being devalued to help the regime exporters, all the while hurting private businesses. Well, now these protests have turned into something much, much bigger. The reason I say this is because even the regime forces in some cities are giving up and joining the protesters. The first city was the border city of Abdanan. This city is on the border of Iran and Iraq, and we have verified videos coming out of the city on January 6th, where protesters are marching on the streets, and the police officers who are supposed to be stopping the protesters are actually clapping and waving to the protesters as they march past. Take a listen. This is exactly why many are saying that this city has declared itself to be the first Iranian city to be fully free from the control of the Islamic regime. Now, showing clips of protest on YouTube is a dangerous game because YouTube has a habit of restricting our videos. So if you can please help us out by hitting the subscribe button down below, it would really mean a lot. Now let's get back. Now, soon after this news came out, we had another city join this list. That was the city of Malik Shahi. As you can see from the map, this is also a border city just a little bit north of the first city, and in this city it seems things got a bit violent. A large crowd of people had stormed a government-owned commercial complex, I'm guessing that's a mall, and caused damage to the building. But nothing was stolen from the scene, meaning this protest has turned into something much bigger than just economics, and the message from the people is clear. They reject the Islamic Republic and everything associated with it. Now, here's something interesting about both these cities. They are majority Kurds. We had an interesting statement come out from the Kurdistan Freedom Party. They announced that 4 of their soldiers were killed and 8 others were wounded in clashes with the Iranian regime while confronting the Iranian forces who opened fire on the protesters. According to the statement, an unknown amount of Iranian regime forces were captured as well. If this is true, this marks the first insurgency action against the Iranian regime by a military faction since the start of the protest. Definitely a big development. Now, as if this wasn't already bad enough for the Islamic regime, we also have some reports about US Army Delta forces being positioned near the Iraq and Syria border. Now, that's definitely not close to Iran. It's on the other side of Iraq compared to the Iraq-Iranian border, but it's definitely closer than where the Delta forces were just a few days ago. This was the same group that captured Maduro. Now, I do want to put a big disclaimer here. This news has only been confirmed by Kurdistan 24, which is an Iraqi-based news company. No other major international company or news company has confirmed this report. So I'm not actually sure how true this is, but we will find out in the coming days. So definitely take this report with a grain of salt until we have more confirmation. Now, something else happened over the last few days that was really big. We had the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei give his first public address since protests started. And surprise, surprise, he's calling on protesters to be put down. Just take a listen.
The unbridled rise in value of foreign currency and its instability, the fact that it goes up and down all the time, which causes the merchants not to know what to do, is not something natural. It is the handiwork of the enemy. The important point is that a bunch of incited enemy mercenaries stand behind the bazaris chanting slogans against Islam, against Iran, and against the Islamic Republic. This is what's important. Death to the hypocrites! Death to the hypocrites! Death to the hypocrites! Protest is legitimate, but it is different from rioting. We are talking with the protesters. The officials should talk to them. However, there is no point in talking with the rioters. The rioters should be put in their place.
Now, it is a little comical that they're blaming the currency collapse on the enemy. I'm guessing they mean the United States by that. But in reality, it was the Iranian government that devalued their own currency. So in no way the enemy is responsible for this unless they're blaming these on sanctions, which I'm guessing they'll take that excuse if they hear this video. But anyways, it doesn't seem like the Iranian leadership is in sync, because all the while Ayatollah is blaming the enemies, the Iranian president is blaming Iranians for their problems. Take a look at his speech.
If you save 10% on your electricity, gas, and water usage, we can save 900,000 barrels of oil and gas daily. This is our country's wealth and we're wasting it. We consume electricity unnecessarily. We use too much heat. Right now, I'm sweating and feel like taking off my jacket. But according to protocol, I can't. It didn't have to be this warm in here. Lowering the temperature by just 2 degrees would save so much energy. But we don't care. We consume, and then we criticize others. Who's consuming correctly? Who's consuming these resources like this? It's you and me. No need to point fingers at anyone else.
Now, statements like these is exactly why people are getting sick of the Iranian regime. Take a look at this clip on your screen. There is a banner of Qasem Soleimani. This was the general which was assassinated by a US drone. And people celebrated him when he died. He was kind of like a god or a martyr, I guess. That's a better word. Well, now the same people are burning down his posters because they are sick of anything that's related to the regime, and they're sick of the attacks that peaceful protesters are going through. You see, the government forces are so scared about these protesters that they're literally blasting a message through speakers, telling everyone to go home or die. I'm not even kidding. Take a listen. Now, it is hard to put an exact number as to how many people have died so far, but based on respected reports online, it seems anywhere from 30 to 35 people have been killed. Now, this is where things get a bit sickening. Because according to the reports, it looks like the police officers are taking away the bodies of the protesters that they kill. Then they're blackmailing the families into signing a contract that basically says that the protester was actually part of the IRGC, so for the regime force. Families have to agree to this, and they have to agree to a private burial, not a public funeral. And if they agree to all this, then only they get the bodies back. If they don't agree to it, well, they're not getting the bodies back of their loved ones. The reason the government is doing this is because a lot of these funerals are actually just fueling the protest. After people see that their government is killing the protesters who are peacefully protesting economic problems, the people get angrier and then they get violent. Take a look at this.
Violence erupted on the streets of Malik Shahi today. It came off the back of the funerals of some of those killed there at the weekend. But during the ceremony itself, the sound of mourning was replaced by this. Although towns like this have been economically neglected for years, it's still not the type of place you'd expect to hear so many chanting that. Something is shifting.
Now, despite the harsh crackdown by the military forces, the Iranian public just keeps going out and they keep joining the protesters. That's because many of them truly believe that this is the matter of life and death. They cannot keep living the way they've been living, so they have to go out and they have to push for a change. Take a listen to this interview with some of the Iranian protesters who had to hide their identity, but they shared their message.
My company shrank and eventually I had to shut it down. My income dropped, my debts increased. Everything is so much more expensive. The anger of protesters today is justified because people cannot even afford to buy bread. I believe the protests will continue because in reality, this is a revolution of the hungry.
This woman is a mother of two. She hasn't taken to the streets of Tehran yet.
When life and death no longer make a difference to us, why should we be afraid? We have seen nothing from this regime except hunger, inflation, and misery.
At first, the regime said it would listen to voices like these, threw money at the problem, a small temporary living allowance introduced yesterday. But at the same time made it clear their patience was running out with the protests. And this is what that looked like in the city of Shahrakord today.
We have entered the 12th day of the uprising, and the situation in Iran has officially spiraled out of control. We are no longer just seeing chants in the street. We are seeing police stations under attack, commanders gunned down in broad daylight, and the flags burning in the city square. As the Ayatollah prepares to pull the plug on the internet, the US has sent a clear signal. Stop the killing or we will stop you. Here's the latest from the ground. More and more cities are joining in on the revolution. Over the last 24 hours, there's been a notable increase in protests that are happening across the country and the size of the protests that are happening. A clip that's now going viral on Iranian social media, you can see a female protester with a bloodied face chanting that she's not afraid anymore. Take a look. Clips like these are just bringing more and more people to the streets. They realize that it's time for a change. And there's also something that's unique about these protests compared to the previous ones that have happened in the country. You see, this one is more decentralized and geographically dispersed. More and more small towns and cities are doing most of the work, and that makes it difficult for the regime to control it. And as the size of the protests grow every single day, it becomes dangerous for the dictatorship. according to some political science reports. The participation rate in these protests is reaching the critical 4% threshold. This is widely seen as sufficient to trigger a collapse. The 4% number may seem small, but remember, Iran is a country of 90 million people. That means 4% of the population is 3.6 million people protesting. That's a scary sight for any government, let alone a dictatorship. Now, of course, there is an important disclaimer to all this. It's impossible to verify the number of protesters across a country which doesn't really like being transparent. But we are seeing some reports and we are seeing some footage of security forces in many cities just getting overwhelmed. In many of these clips, we can see the protesters fighting with security forces with just rocks. And as you can see from the clip on your screen, in many instances, the rocks are actually winning the fight and the security forces are fleeing the area, sometimes fleeing the city. Because of this, we're seeing reports of multiple different major cities actually being liberated. Here's a report that says that Iran's second largest city, Mashhad, which has a population of 4 million people, is actually nearing liberation as protesters gain ground. One of the most symbolic videos of the uprising actually came out of the city just last night. In this video, we can see the protesters take down the Islamic regime's flag and tear it apart in the city center. Take a look.
پایین آوردن پرچم مشهد تبرسی 17 دیما جاوید شاه.
In the same city, we see in another footage that protesters are setting fire to a bus that belonged to the paramilitary volunteer force of the IRGC. This is basically the army that Ayatollah uses to squash down any protest. Then in the same city, we have another footage coming out that shows protesters attacking a religious school and setting fire to the building. Many Iranians see these schools as the source of the problem because, as many of you guys may already know, Iran is a theocracy and a lot of these religious schools have become like an arm of the government to basically brainwash the future generations. Now, this is where things get interesting because we're also seeing some religious leaders, some clerics, come out in support of protesters and call for the overthrow of Ayatollah Khamenei. Take a listen to this.
I am opposed to this murderous criminal government. May God curse Khomeini, who threw this country into a misery that has harmed the nation of Iran, the country of Iran, and religion itself. It is obligatory for all people to rise up and tear apart the structure of this malicious, murderous government. May God curse Khomeini and Khamenei. May God curse Khomeini and Khamenei.
Thank you, Haji Aga.
Death to Khamenei, death to Khamenei.
Yes, yes, yes.
I shit on Khomeini's grave.
Well done, well done, well done.
Yesterday, we also saw a video of protesters taking down the statue of the commander Hossein Soleimani. As many of you guys may remember, this was the commander that President Trump assassinated with a drone strike in 2022. Now, just to show you how much the mood in the country has changed, on your screen you can see the public funeral that was held for this commander when he died in 2020. So many people actually showed up to the main place where it was happening, and many more people joined in just, in their cities. People were literally crying, chanting, and just yelling in support of him and because he was dead. And now they're tearing down his statues. This is exactly why Iranian cities are revolting all across the country. Here you can see the city of Karaj. It has a population of 1.5 million people and it seems to have been liberated by the protesters. This is the third biggest city in the country and by far the largest one that has been liberated so far. It is also one of Iran's industrial centers. Located west of Tehran, it is an important transport hub connecting Tehran to the Caspian Sea. And of course, important disclaimer again, there are some reports also saying that the city is still not free. The fighting is still going on, and we are seeing footage of fighting ongoing, but we don't exactly know when this footage is from. Take a look. Here you can see the protesters fighting with Iranian security forces. And then we get to one of the most shocking clips that came out yesterday. In the Iranian city of Sahar, a commander of a police station was gunned down in broad daylight, and the group that carried out this act actually released the footage. This group is the Iranian Baloch group called Jasar al-Ud. They released the footage that we clearly cannot show on YouTube. But in this footage, we can see the POV of a passenger sitting in a car with the AK-47. The car drives up to a different car, which we can assume the commander was sitting in, and then the AK-47 goes off, and then the car drives off. It seemed like we were watching Narcos on Netflix or something, but that's the reality inside Iran. Now, the problem is that it seems like, based on reports that are coming out, that the regime is preparing for something horrible. Now, the reason I say this is because tomorrow is the 12th day. In fact, by the time you guys are watching this video, it's likely already the 12th day of the protest. Now, that may be a symbolic point for many people because, as you guys may remember, the Israeli-Iranian war that took place last year lasted exactly 12 days, and that's why it was called the 12-day war. For Iranians, and especially for the regime, many of the problems started, or I guess they got worse because of this war. People saw that the Iranian forces had no ability to stand up against Israel. And that's a very bad news for a government that has built their legitimacy on the claim that they can fight Israel. That's why it seems like, at least based on reports that are coming out, that the Islamic regime is preparing for a full-on internet blackout in the country, at least for the 12th day. Take a listen. This is the message that was put out by the son of the former Shah of Iran.
My fellow countrymen, today, Wednesday, January 7th, your presence across Iran was unprecedented, and this constitutes a declaration of readiness for tomorrow's plan. The call for Thursday, January 8th, at 8 p.m. Of course, reports have reached us that the regime is deeply frightened and is attempting once again to cut off the internet. Know that our communication will not be severed, whether through the hundreds of thousands of Starlink devices in Iran or through the Iran International and Monodo television networks. But if the regime commits such a mistake and cuts the internet, that itself will be another call to continue your presence and to take over the streets. In this way, you will drive yet another nail into the coffin of this regime. You will be victorious. Long live Iran.
Now, this is exactly what has happened previously when there were protests inside Iran. As you can see from the screenshot on your screen, Iran has had a lot of protests over the last few decades. And every single time, unfortunately, the regime has survived. So, how did they survive? Well, the sad reality is that theocracy is extremely brutal, and there are still a lot of people who support this theocracy. That means whenever things get too out of control, they shut down the internet and they go on a brutal killing spree. That's exactly how the Ayatollah has maintained his grip on power. Now, of course, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen again this time, but we do have to keep that in mind. Now here, I do want to point out two different things that are present this time that weren't present in the previous crackdowns that the theocracy has carried out. The first one is, of course, it's going to be a lot harder for the regime to shut down the internet because of Starlink. Now, some of you guys may already know this, but Starlink is the new Elon Musk company that can give you internet directly from satellite, basically how we have on our phones. That means you don't need to depend on any cables or wires or anything like that. But what you do need is a Starlink terminal. You turn on the terminal, it connects to the satellite, and voila, you have Wi-Fi. Now, I'm not an expert on Iranian law, but from what I know, I think selling Starlink terminals in Iran is illegal. But we know there are roughly thousands, maybe tens of thousands of terminals that have been smuggled in. So that should make it harder for the security forces to shut down the internet completely. And the second thing, which is of course the bigger thing, is the United States. Over the last 2 weeks, President Trump has made multiple public comments that he will get involved if the Iranian forces start killing innocent protesters. Now, killings have been ongoing. In fact, we know from public reports from nonprofit organizations that Iranian forces have killed around 30 to 35 people already. But if that goes up significantly, the chances of US involvement does go up a lot. Maybe even Israeli involvement, or maybe just Israeli involvement also. In fact, just last night on January 8th, someone from the White House told Iran International that the United States will respond if Iran starts killing protesters. So that's definitely just confirming the comments that President has been making publicly. Now, US involvement doesn't necessarily have to mean boots on the ground. We already saw that in Venezuela. And on top of that, we have some precedent from before. In Libya, US soldiers did not have to go on the ground. The US Air Force was enough to basically help the protesters achieve their goals. That same thing could happen. Here are some experts sharing their thoughts.
One of the issues that we've been reading a lot about in the press since Maduro's capture is, how his inner circle had been infiltrated by the U.S. intelligence, and that played a key role in how this operation was, successfully achieved in a few hours, essentially. Does the U.S. or partner states like Israel have that kind of capacity in Iran? That's a big question mark. But if we look at the 12-day war we just had in the summer of 2025, clearly Israel, certainly in the United States, I'm sure, they have many eyes and ears inside the Iranian regime. Otherwise, they could not have done the sort of targeted assassinations that they achieved.
President Trump prefers low risk and no boots on the ground model of a surgical attack. Therefore, it is possible to think that he might be contemplating something like that.
The lights have gone out. As of 7 p.m. local time, the Iranian regime has pulled the plug on entire country's internet, severing mobile data and broadband networks in a total information blackout. History tells us that this is the calm before the storm, the last step before a brutal crackdown. But despite the darkness, the footage is still leaking out via Starlink, and what it shows is terrifying. From hazmat suits on the streets to schools turned into military bases, here is what is happening inside Iran right now. It's getting so bad that some government officials are begging France for refugee visas. But let's start from the beginning. There's a complete internet blackout happening right now inside Iran, and many people can expect what's coming. This is the third blackout that has ever taken place in the history of the country, and it's time to pray for the protesters. That's because evidence shows that IRGC is deploying all kinds of weapons while the protesters are fighting with rocks. It is expected that the regime forces will use maximum pressure, including killing dozens of protesters in an attempt to crush the protest. Not only home internet, but also mobile data and broadband networks have been shut down. This blackout helps the regime isolate people from news, severe communication lines, and subject them to psychological warfare and propaganda through state media. In the past, whenever internet access in Iran was blocked, the regime went on to murder hundreds of protesters. The authorities have also summoned journalists from all across the country, asking them to sign pledges to not report on ongoing protests, which many journalists have refused. But for that, they have received threats of arrest if they continue to report on the situation. Many people who have seen how regime deals with protesters in the past are now directly appealing to the security forces to basically lay down arms, to not attack the citizens of their own country. This also includes the son of the former Shah of Iran who put out this message.
This is a direct message addressed to Iran's armed and security forces. You who wear a military uniform to defend the Iranian nation, and who are now facing a historic choice. At a time when the brave and united people of Iran are building and writing history, my question to you is this. On which side of history will you stand? Alongside the criminals or alongside the people? The issue is no longer whether the Islamic Republic, this corrupt and repressive regime, will fall or not. The only issue is the timing of its collapse, and that time is closer than ever. In these decisive moments, I expect you to return to the embrace of the nation and to use your weapons not to fire on the people, but to protect them.
As you guys know, covering protests on YouTube is a very risky task because YouTube has a habit of restricting these videos. So if you can please help us out by hitting the subscribe button down below, it would really mean a lot. Now let's get back to the message from Shah's son. He also called on Iranians to come out at exactly 8 p.m. local time on January 8th. Clearly, Ayatollah was worried about this time, and that's why the internet blackout started roughly an hour before 8 p.m. Before this time slot, citizens also started receiving direct intimidation messages from the regime police. The message openly threatened people with prosecution and criminal charges simply for being present in a protest-related group and expressing opposition views. It also ordered citizens to stop taking part in public gatherings, warning that any involvement will be treated as criminal offense. This is not law enforcement. This is political intimidation. The Islamic Republic is now resorting to collective threats, digital surveillance, and fear messaging to silence the public. A regime that must threaten its own people by text messages is a regime that has lost control. And Iranian people don't want to live in a country like that.
What I'm about to say may surprise you, coming from the Prime Minister of Israel. But I categorically state, Iranians are among the most gifted and successful people in the world. Of course, there's one catch. When they leave Iran. You see, in Silicon Valley, entrepreneurs of Iranian heritage are among the founders and CEOs of Uber, eBay, Dropbox, and many other outstanding companies. The Iranian people are brilliant. They're innovative. So why is Iran so poor? Why is unemployment so rampant? The answer is in two words: the regime. Iran's dictators plunder the country's wealth. Isn't it a shame that Iran doesn't invest in its people? Instead, they divert tens of billions of dollars to their nuclear program, to the spread of terror around the world, to their aggression throughout the Middle East. Meanwhile, the Iranian people are the ones that suffer. I look forward to the day when the Iranian people don't need to go to Silicon Valley, don't need to go there to build the most successful companies in the world. Imagine Iranian and Israeli entrepreneurs working together in Iran and in Israel for the betterment of all humanity. That's my hope. That is my vision. And that can be our future.
Now, we are seeing some clips still come out of Iran while the internet blackout is in effect, and it seems like that people are coming out onto the streets in enormous numbers. But before we get to those clips, I want to show you guys how the Iranian forces prepared for tonight, how they were preparing for this brutal crackdown. The regime is turning schools into a military base to crush protesters. New photos show that Iranian security forces are packing into school campuses in the city of Arak, with dozens of bikes and trucks filling the courtyard. It's the Imam Ali High School, the same one used back in 2022 when protests exploded after Masha Amini was killed in custody after being arrested by Iran's morality police for not wearing her hijab properly. Well, they are using the same tactics. They are using the school as a launchpad to shut down protest fast and hard. This is what fear of your own people looks like. In a separate clip, we are also seeing security forces appear to be using unconventional weapons to confront protesters in some cities. This video obtained by Iran International shows individuals wearing hazmat suits and masks designed for hazardous chemical material positioned on a vehicle deployed on the streets. In the video, we can also see a yellow triangle sign with dark borders indicating warning of hazardous material on the vehicle. On top of all this, over the last few days, as protests have gained more momentum, we have seen security forces use shotguns to basically shoot at the protesters. And also, we have seen them separate some protesters from the group and beat them up on camera. But despite all this, it seems like Iranians showed up at 8 p.m. and they showed up in a big way. As I mentioned earlier in the video, we are still getting some footage coming out of Iran, and we are likely getting these footage because of Starlink. Now, Starlink terminals are illegal in the country, but people have smuggled in anywhere from thousands to maybe tens of thousands of terminals. So definitely nowhere close to what the internet access was in Iran before. But there are some people with internet access because of Starlink, and these are the people sharing footage that you see on your screen. This one is coming from Iran's capital, Tehran. And here we have another footage coming out from the same area, just a different angle, as you can see from your screen. Clearly, a lot of people have taken to the streets. We also have banners popping up around the city reading the slogan, "Until the mullahs are buried, this homeland will not prosper." And of course, there's a new trend going around where people, more specifically Iranian women, are basically smoking the Ayatollahs. Take a look. Because of this, it seems like some Iranian officials are already planning for a plan B. The French Daily reports that senior Iranian officials have sought French visas for their families in recent days. High-ranking dignitary from reformist clans, this includes the president, who is not entirely in the camp of the Ayatollah, but he also doesn't have a lot of power to do a lot of changes, so he's just planning to peace out. Now, recently there was an announcement from this reformist clan in the government that I don't think we have covered, and that was the announcement about giving $7 to Iranian people to not protest. This just shows that there are some people who realize that the situation is getting bad, and I'm guessing that's why they're literally trying to bribe people into not protesting. But clearly, $7 is not enough, because if we just look at the people who are protesting for economic reasons, they're not going to be satisfied with $7 for 4 months. That's just not enough in a country like Iran, where the situation is getting worse every single day. And this money is definitely not enough for people who want political and societal change in Iran. And this is why many Iranians are rightfully pointing out the hypocrisy in all this. In 2025 alone, the Iranian regime smuggled roughly $1 billion to Hezbollah. And now they're offering $7 per month to their own citizens. This clearly shows one of the reasons why protesters are so unhappy. The Iranian government is focused on foreign issues when it cannot afford to do so. They keep chanting "Death to America, death to Israel," all the while not talking about Iran at all. And that's why the protesters are now chanting "Neither Gaza nor Lebanon, my life for Iran." The economic data from Iran shows why protesters want someone who will focus on the country. Iranian GDP actually shrank in 2025, while the inflation was at more than 40%. The IMF predicts that it will likely stay at that level for 2026. The unemployment rate in the country is nearing 10%, while the currency is in free fall. And that's a very bad thing because Iran exports oil, but it imports a lot of goods that people need in their day-to-day life. That means if the currency continues to fall, the cost of living for normal people keeps rising. Now, just to put this in perspective, with a single dollar, Back in June, you could get around 800,000 Iranian rial. And now you'll be a millionaire overnight if you have a single dollar, because now a single dollar equates to 1.4 million rials. That's likely going to be more by tomorrow. And this is exactly why 30% of Iranians are living below the poverty line, with the figure rising every single month. And of course, we cannot forget about the water crisis that triggered all this. That was a crisis that was man-made. It was created by Iranian mismanagement, and the government still refuses to take responsibility. Iran is having a drought because the government did not manage their water supply and their rivers. But instead of changing those policies, they are now blaming America and Israel for manipulating the weather, and they're blaming Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and UAE for diverting clouds away from Iran. I guess this is what happens when you have a theocracy running the country and the economy. The Iranian regime tried to kill the revolution by killing the internet, but it backfired completely. Instead of dispersing, the protests have grown into a nationwide uprising that has now reached IRGC's strongholds. The hometown of Supreme Leader Khamenei has fallen. Last night was a historic turning point in Iran as protesters in Mashhad forced security forces to retreat and set fire to police vehicles in the city center. But the collapse did not stop there. We have reports that the strategic port of Bandar Abbas has been seized by civilians, cutting off a vital economic lifeline. But there's a dark reality to all this. As the internet goes dark, the death toll rises. So here's the full breakdown of the deadliest night yet. We start with one of the most shocking scenes coming out from last night. A protester in a car running into a group of security personnel. Take a look. This type of clashes likely accelerated after the regime shut down the internet. The government plan was to cut off communication lines and then slowly increase the brutality until protesters go home. But it didn't actually work that way. The security forces were actually forced to retreat in country's second largest city of Mashhad. They now only protect a few government buildings and can't do anything about protesters setting fire to police cars in the city center. This is a very big symbolic win, because this is the city where the Khamenei was born and raised in. The holy city used to be a rock-solid regime territory, but last night it exploded. Thousands flooded the streets, chanting death to the dictator and even forcing out IRG forces in some areas. In fact, all across the country last night was a huge night. It was the 12th day of the protest on January 8th, and the protesters have now spread to 153 cities and towns. In the capital city of Tehran, protesters actually arrived just a few hundred meters from the command center of the IRGC near the main square. This is the IRGC headquarters in the main city, clearly a very well-guarded location. We also had some protesters set fire to a memorial plaque honoring the former commander Qasem Soleimani. I really feel like he's having a very bad time in these protests, because in every city, people are going after monuments that are built to honor him. I don't completely get this. Is it because the protesters cannot find anything else that symbolizes the regime? Or is it because they specifically hate this guy? If you're Iranian, maybe let us know down in the comments. And also, as you guys know, YouTube is not a fan of these videos that are giving you updates on protests. So if you can show us some support by hitting the subscribe button down below, it really does mean a lot. Now we move our focus to the coast. Protesters have taken over a key port city of Bandar Abbas. This city is one of Iran's most strategic port cities in the Persian Gulf, and it is crucial to Iran's economy and oil exports. Now it's in hands of furious civilians who are unhappy with the government's mismanagement. In fact, in some places, people are actually calling out for Trump. Take a listen.
Hi, Mr. Trump. Here is Mashhad city. Ayatollah killed my people. Please help to my people. Please help to Reza Pahlavi. Come to Iran. Baby Netanyahu. Please come to Iran. Please help to Iranian people. Ayatollah killed my people. Please help!
Well, guess what? President Trump was actually on a radio call yesterday, and he did make statements about what's going on in Iran. So take a listen.
What about Iran? Is the aim with Iran the collapse of that awful 47-year tyranny?
Well, I don't want to say it, but I will tell you they're not doing well. As you know, probably better than anybody. They're doing very poorly. And I have let them know that if they start killing people, which they tend to do during their riots. They have lots of riots. If they do it, we're going to hit them very hard.
Now, dozens have been killed. I know you don't do red lines, but have you communicated to them what that limit of your patience is?
Well, some have been killed by, problems of crowd control and other things. We're watching it very closely. The crowds are so large, there's been a stampede. There's been 3 stampedes, and people have been killed in that, and I'm not sure I can necessarily hold somebody responsible for that. But they know, and they've been told very strongly, even more strongly than I'm speaking to you right now, that if they do that, they're going to have to pay hell.
Now, just a point of clarification, because we have seen some reports that point out that roughly 40 people have died in Iran so far. This number includes a few IRGC personnel too. But vast majority of the deaths have been protesters, and they have been because of the brutality of the regime forces. So I think it's unfair to say that all the people who've died have died because of a stampede. Anyways, next up, President Trump also had a message for the Iranian people who are protesting on the streets and risking their lives. Take a listen.
Do you have a message for the people of Iran, President Trump?
All I can say is you should feel strongly about freedom. There's nothing like freedom. You're brave people. It's a shame what's happened to your country. Your country was a great country. I remember years ago when I was a young real estate developer, friends of mine went to Iran and they did great. They built buildings in Iran. They're still up, barely, by the way, but they're still up. I see pictures of them, apartment houses, and they did very well in Iran. They've passed away. They were very successful developers. They were great people, mostly New York developers, but they went to Iran and they built some pretty good jobs in Iran. And I remember they were saying the people are great. The whole place was great. It was a tremendous market. And now you look at it. Look what's happened.
Clearly, it was a big night because millions of Iranians took to the street to demand their freedom. So let's zoom out a bit and look at the big picture. Now, as you guys know, there was an internet blackout, so we don't have all the details yet. But based on the information we do have, this was by far the largest protest against the Islamic Republic in their 47-year-old history. When aggregated nationwide, the turnout reached multi-million levels. One of the largest demonstrations took place in the city of Mashhad, Khamenei's hometown and a city tightly controlled by his inner circle. In Tehran, protests expanded into more affluent neighborhoods. Drivers also joined in with continuous honking, while bazaar merchants went on strike in around 50 cities nationwide. Student protests also erupted at least 36 universities, with openly anti-regime slogans being chanted. Iranian human rights group report at least 45 protesters killed, including 8 children, and hundreds injured. Yesterday alone saw 13 deaths, making it one of the bloodiest days so far. The Iranian state media, while forced to acknowledge the unrest, was pushing a narrative of small crowds and emphasizing alleged attacks on security forces, a pattern that analysts warn may signal preparation for harsher repression. Social media, especially Instagram ahead of protests, showed unprecedented public coordination and solidarity. Shop closures announced in advance, emotional farewell messages, and strong virtual participation even from those unable to attend. Protests are expected to continue in the coming days, especially tomorrow. The movement's success will hinge on public's ability to neutralize the Islamic Republic's repressive apparatus. So far, the regime appears not to have fully deployed its full coercive capacity, relying instead on mass arrest and widespread injuries. If protests advance to the point of overrunning security and state institutions, the regime may resort to large-scale lethal violence. The role of Israel and the United States is crucial to the success of protests. In fact, last night we actually saw some reports that security forces were open firing in various cities. It was still nowhere close to what people were expecting, but it's important to remember that the internet lockdown continues, and that's a worrying sign. We saw some footage coming out from the capital city of Tehran where we can hear the gunfire ringing while the protesters were marching on the streets. And because of reports like these, it seems like Iran is truly closing down to the outside world. We saw some reports that flights from Turkey could not land in Tehran, so they had to go back to Istanbul. And the same thing was reported for flights from other countries too. Now, this could likely be because of the electricity outage that the government is rolling out to crush the protest, but it could be for something else too. The reason I say this is because we saw some top Iranian officials move their family out of the country. I'm not sure if that's a good news for the protesters or bad news. The Lebanese foreign media reported that Iranian foreign minister's visit to Beirut was not merely ceremonial, as he arrived accompanied by his family. He was traveling with his wife, his daughter, and his sons. And according to the report, he and his family are expected to remain in Lebanon for an unspecified period of time. Now, it is a little comical that the foreign minister brought an economic delegation to Lebanon, all the while Iranians are protesting the economic policies that his government has implemented. In fact, even the US Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, said publicly yesterday that the Iranian economy is on the ropes. He went on to add that Iran used to be an affluent society that maintained high standards of living, but now it's all crumbling. At the same time, we also had Vice President J.D. Vance make a public statement about Iran. I think this is the first one since the protests started. I could be wrong about that, but let's take a listen to the statement.
Regarding Iran, we're seeing the protests in Iran these days. The cities are begging for help from the U.S. and Israel, naming streets in the city after President Trump. It seems there is an opportunity here that may not come again. Will the United States stand by the citizens of Iran? And if Israel decides to strike again the nuclear sites in Iran, is the U.S. expected to take part?
Well, look, we certainly stand by anybody who's engaged in peaceful protest, anybody who's trying to exert their rights for free association and to have their voices heard. Obviously, the Iranian regime has a lot of problems. And as the President of the United States has said, the smartest thing for them to have done, it was true 2 months ago, it's true today, is for them to actually have a real negotiation with the United States about what we need to see when it comes to their nuclear program. I'll let the President speak to what we're going to do in the future, but we certainly stand with anybody across the world, including the Iranian people who are advocating for their rights.
Now, that's all I have for you guys today. My name is Sam, and I'll see you in the next video.